Okay, good morning, everyone. Um, Today we are going to move to the next topic, which is the types of narration. In the past, we discussed, fiction and what types of fiction we have, and also we talked about, the plot and what are the elements of the plot. We talked about the exposition, the rising action, the climax, the falling action, and the resolution or the conclusion. Now today is the last, section for the for fiction, which is the types of narration. Um, as you know, in every story we have a narrator. So we have to know what types of narrator we have and how can we distinguish a narrator from other characters and also from the author, him or herself. Okay, so the first type of narrator that we have to take into consideration is called the third person narrator. Okay, the third person narrator. Okay, what do we mean by this third person narrator? A third person narrator tells tells an unidentified listener or reader what happened, referring to all characters using the pronoun he, she, or they. Third person narration is usually always external, meaning that the narrator is not a character in the story and does not participate in action. Even so, different types of third-person narration, omniscient, limited, and objective, provide the reader with various amounts and kinds of information about the characters. Okay, so the first thing that we have to understand is that in the first-person narrator, when you read a story, you will find the pronoun he or she or they, okay? So whenever you see these pronouns, you know that this narrator is is a third person, meaning that this that this narrator does not participate in the story's action. Because when you use he or she or they, you are not part of the story, okay? And because you're not part of the story, then you are a third person narrator. Now, for third person narration or narrator, we have three types, okay? We have the omniscient, and we have the limited, and then we have the objective narrator. So every type has a specific function in a story. So okay, so let me just say it again, that a third person narrator is a narrator that uses pronouns he, she, or they, because simply this narrator does not participate in the story. And this kind of narrator has three types. uh, we have the omniscient or omniscient, and we have the limited, and then we have the objective. And we will talk about these narrators here in detail. An omniscient or unlimited narrator has access to the thoughts, perceptions, and experiences of more than one character, often of several. Those such narrators usually focus selectively on a few important characters. A limited narrator is an external third-person narrator who tells the story from a distinctive point of view, usually that of a single character, revealing that the character's thoughts are relating the action from his or her perspective. So here in this part, we have an explanation for the omniscient or unlimited narrator. What does this kind of narrator, do in the story? This narrator has access to the thoughts and perception and experiences of more than one character or several characters. So simply, this narrator is able to comment on characters, okay, and he's able to access their thoughts, their perceptions, the way they think, the way they feel, and the way they experience things. So simply, he has a power or the ability to get into the thoughts and the perceptions and the experiences of more than one character. Okay, now look at the limited narrator. The limited narrator on the opposite side, okay, he has the ability to tell the story from a distinct point of view, usually that of a single character. okay? Revealing the character's thoughts and relating the actions from his perspective. So simply the difference between an omniscient or unlimited narrator and the limited narrator is that the omniscient narrator has access to more than one character, has access to the thoughts, perceptions, and experiences of more than one character, several characters. But the limited narrator has only access to one and single character. The focal character is also known as the central consciousness. Sometimes a limited narrator will reveal the thoughts and the feelings of a small number of characters in order to enhance the stories told about the central consciousness. Okay, Jane Austen's novel Emma includes a few episodes from Mr. Knightley's point of view to show what he thinks about Emma Woodhouse, the focal character, and her relationship. Finally, an objective narrator. Okay, what does he do, or what does she do? Does not explicitly reports the character's thoughts and feelings. Okay, he does not. Okay, that's a good thing. He does not reveal or explicitly report the character's thoughts and feelings, but may obliquely suggest them through character speeches and actions. Stories with objective narrators consist mostly of dialogue interspersed with minimal description. Okay, so here the third type of narrator, which is the objective narrator. He does not explicitly report characters' thoughts and feelings, but may obliquely suggest them through the character's speeches and actions. So what does that mean is that this kind of narrator, the objective, is that he does not, talk about the character's feelings and emotions and actions. He simply, portray them or show them through their speeches and their actions. So simply we find characters speaking, and through this action we can know about these characters. So simply it is called objective because unlike the omniscient and the limited narrators who comment on the characters and who have their own viewpoints about these characters, the objective does not comment on these characters. He's an objective narrator. He does not report the character's thoughts and feelings, but he show you how they speak and what kind of actions they have. And through actions and speech, we can know what kind of characters these are. So to summarize the third person narrator, we have three types. First of all, the third person narrator is when we talk about characters or the narrator that uses he, she, or they. Okay, and this kind of narrator is not a participant in the story. So the narrator is not a character. He's not a character. And this kind of narrator is divided into three: omniscient, limited, and objective. Now, omniscient is the narrator that has the ability to access the character's thoughts, experiences, and feelings. And he has access to many or several characters. Now, the limited is in the opposite. He has access to one single character. And that's why we call him a limited narrator, because he access to a single, a character. Now, the last one, which is the objective narrator, he has no access to, or he does not comment on the feelings and the thoughts of the characters. So he's different from the limited and omniscient narrators in the fact that he does not comment on their feelings and thoughts, but rather he shows how these characters speak. And through this speech and action of the characters, we, the readers, can tell what kind of characters they are. And that's the third part or the last part. Okay. And that's why, in the objective, we have mostly dialogue interspersed with minimal description. So the dialogue is that we have a conversation between two characters, and through this dialogue we can understand these characters, but the objective narrator does not comment on this dialogue. He simply shows us, but he does not tell us. Okay, now the second type of narration is the first person narration. Okay, Instead of using third-person narration, an author might choose to tell a story from the point of view of a first-person narrator. Most common is the first-person singular narration, in which the narrator uses the pronoun I. Now, if you remember, in the third-person narrator, we use he, she, they. But in the first-person narrator, we use the pronoun I. So whenever you see the pronoun I, then you know that this narrator is a first-person narrator. And okay, the narrator may be major or minor within the story, and therefore is an internal narrator. Notice that the first-person narrator may be telling a story mainly about someone else or about his or her own experience. Sometimes the first-person narrator addresses an auditor, a listener within the fiction, and whose possible reaction is part of the story. Here, guys, that you have to understand is that the first-person narrator, we have a person or a narrator who is a character in the story. While in the third-person narrator, the narrators are not characters in the story. In the first person, he is a character. And we know the story, or he chooses to tell the story, okay, from the point of view of the first-person narrator. So simply, he tells us a story from his point of view, okay? And he is also a character in the story. That's why we call it a first-person narration. Now, one kind of narrator that is especially effective at producing irony is the unreliable narrator. First-person narrator may unintentionally reveal their flaws as they try to impress, or narrators may make claims that other characters or audiences know to be false or distorted. Some fictions are narrated by villains, insane people, fools, liars, and hypocrites. When we resist a narrator's point of view and judge his or her flaws or imperceptions, we call the narrator unreliable. This does not mean that you should dismiss everything such a narrator says, but you should be on the alert for ironies. Okay, now, as we said, because this kind of narrator tells the story from his or her own point of view, or as we have here, notice that the first person narrator may be telling the story mainly about someone or about his or her own experience. So he's a character in the story, okay? Now, what's the problem with the first-person narrator? The first-person narrator is that he or she may be producing irony, is the unreliable narrator, okay? That he's unreliable narrator. The first-person narrator is not unreliable because simply he's prejudiced against other characters, and he's biased. He's prejudiced and biased, okay? How we know that he's biased or prejudiced? Because he tried to unintentionally reveal his flaws, yeah, it means that his problems, and as they try to impress, okay? Okay, and they also, like we as readers, we can tell that the first person narrator is unreliable, or that we cannot rely on this character because simply he exaggerates or he tells lies from his own or her own point of view. Now, less common is the first person plural, where the narrator uses the pronoun we. The plural may be used effectively to express the shared perspective of community, particularly one that is isolated, usually close-knit or highly relegated. Elizabeth Casket classic novel, Cranford, is a good example. The narrator is a young woman who visits a community of genteel widows and spinsters in the English village of Cranford and describes their customs. At one point, a visitor arrives, Lady all of society is in awe of her aristocratic rank and title. At an evening party, we were all very silent at first. We were thinking that we could talk about that should be high enough to interest Mrs. Lady. There had been a rise in the price of sugar, which, as preserving time was near, was a piece of intelligence to tell all our housekeeping hearts, and would have been the natural topic if the Lady Glimmer had not been by. But we were not sure if the peerage ate preserves, that is, whether aristocrats ate fruit jam. The high price of sugar does not seem high enough in other sense for high-ranked guests to talk about. Okay, so simply here, what is going on is that within the first-person narrator, okay, we have something called the first plural narrator. Okay, I don't think this is very important in fiction because we don't find this often, the first person plural. Why we call it first person plural? Because we have the use of pronoun we. Now in the previous one we have the use of pronoun I. Okay, but here the first person plural we use the pronoun we. And here we use we when we talk about, a community, okay? Like, for example, I'm talking about my community. I say, we in Jordan like to go to the sea and we like to enjoy. So the we here, I'm telling my story, okay, using the first pronoun or the first person plural, which is the we. And as you can see here in the examples here, we have the pronoun we here. See, we. So that's called the first plural or the first pronoun plural, we. Okay. Okay, I don't think that you need to worry about this. Just skip it. Now the last one is the second person narration. So we have three types. We have the third person, we have first person, and then we have the second person. Like narrators who refers to themselves as we throughout a work of fiction, second person narrator who consistently speak to you are unusual. This technique has the effect of turning the reader into a character in the story. J. McHenry, for example, in his novel Bright Lights, Big City, employs the second person voice, creating an effect similar to conversational anecdote. But second person narratives can instead sound much like instructional manuals or how-to books, and like parents or other elders speaking to children. So here, the second person narrator, we have the use of you, or the narrator speak to you by using the pronoun you, okay? And this technique has the effect of turning the reader into a character in the story. So simply when the narrator talks to you and to the reader and say you, now you, the reader, becomes a character in the story, okay? And that's the last of the third type of narration. Now the thing about this kind of second person narration is that this kind of narrative sounds much like an instructional manuals or how to books, or like parents who are other elders speaking to children. So simply when you have the second person narration, you feel like someone is talking to you and giving you instructions. Do this, do that, you go this, you go, you see that, you see this. Now the use of pronoun you makes you a character in the story, but at the same time, it also gives you instructions. Okay. Now, the last thing is the narrator versus the implied author. Now, one thing, guys, that you have to understand is to distinguish between the author and the narrator, okay? The narrator is the person who tells the story, but the author is the poor person who wrote the story. So there is a difference between the person who tells the story and the person who narrates the story. For example, Mr. Wild Salam is writing a short story or a novel, okay? And my novel is about a little girl. And this little girl is telling us the story. She is the narrator. Now, is there a difference between the little girl and the author? Yes, there is a difference because this is a little girl who's narrating the story. And this girl is different from the author because I am not a girl, I'm not a little girl. That's why, you have to distinguish between the author and the narrator. And don't confuse these two things. In fiction, we have, most of the time, we have the narrators talking, not the authors. So don't say the author says, or the author says, yes, the author says, but the narrator says, or the character says. Okay. Yeah, so that's, So page 2, let's go to page 3. Sorry. Now here we are going to talk about the figures of speech. Okay. Now, what do we mean by figures of speech or the figurative language? This is very important, by the way, and you have to know what we mean by figures of speech. Now, figures of speech or figurative language are similar to symbols in that they supplement or replace literal meaning, often by creating imaginative connection between our ideas and our senses. So this is what we mean by figures of speech is that they are similar to symbols in that they supplement or replace literal meaning, often by creating imaginative connections between ideas and our senses. So simply, figurative language is the opposite of literal meaning. The opposite of literal is the symbolic or the figurative, okay? And that's what we mean by figurative language, and sometimes referred to as tropes. We refer to figurative language as tropes, literary turnings. Figures of speech could be described as bending the usual meaning of language and shaping our response to work, whether or not they have anything to do with the special forms or figures, or whether they rely on vision. Such tropes contribute to what are called the image or imagery of the story. Many figures of speech are known by the Latin or Greek names used in the classical and Greek Roman as rhetoric, the art and the science of speech and persuasion. Okay. Okay, so yeah, so here you have key figures of speech that we have to get ourselves acquainted with. The first figure of speech is called the allegory. The allegory. What do we mean by allegory? Allegory is an extended association, often sustained in every element, characters, plot, settings, and throughout an entire work between two level of meaning, usually literal and abstract. Animal Farm is, for example, George Orwell uses an subrising of barnyard animals as an allegory for the Bolshevik revolution in Russia. Okay, so what is allegory? Allegory is a story, okay, or a story that has an association with something, okay. So we have, in allegory, we have a figurative meaning, but this figurative meaning refers to something real or real life. For example, this short story, or this novel, sorry, it's called Animal Farm by George Orwell. It talks about what? It talks about animals living in farms, okay? We have horses, pigs, all kinds of animals, and they try to fight man, and they try to fight for their freedom. Now, this Animal Farm is an allegory because these animals represent real people, okay? And these animals, when they call for their freedom, it refers to the Bolshevik revolution in Russia, okay? So simply here we have animals referring to human beings and referring to real events. That's what we call allegory. So this Animal Farm is an allegorical story or allegory because the animal farms represent real people and is connected to real events. And that's why, you know, here in the definition, it says here, it's an association. So animals are associated with human beings and with the Bolshevik revolution, often sustained in every element and throughout an entire work between two levels of meaning. Okay, so we have two levels. The first level is the animals, and the second level is the real people or the Bolshevik revolution in Russia. Okay, now the second one, sorry, is the allusion. What does allusion mean? Allusion is a reference, usually brief, to another text or someone, person, or entity external to the work. Examples may range from direct quotation of the Bible to the mention of a famous name. So allusion simply, when you read a literary work, for example, you read, let's say, a story of an hour, okay? The short story that we read. And then you have a quotation from the Bible. This quotation from the Bible in this story is called allusion, a reference. Or you may find something that refers to the Quran. Quran is an allusion if you find it in any literary work. Or if you find a name of a famous person, for example, Salah ad-Din. If you find Salah ad-Din in a short fiction, a short story or a novel, this is called allusion. Why? Because you refer to someone or something that is famous or that is known by the people. Now, irony, a meaning or outcome contrary to what is expected. So irony means that when you say something and you mean something else. For example, when you say, when a little child breaks something, okay, and you say, oh, that's good, thank you. Now that's good is ironic. Why? Because you say something, but you mean something else, okay? That is called irony. In verbal irony, a speaker or narrator says one thing and means the reverse. When the intended meaning is harshly critical or mocking, it is called sarcasm. Okay, now let's say I gave you an exam and your grades were very bad, okay? And when I come and give you the papers, I say, well, you did a good job, students. Your grades are perfect. Now this is irony because your grades are not perfect, but I am saying, or this is an irony because I say something, but I mean something else. Now, if this criticism is very harsh and critical, then it is called sarcasm. So sarcasm is the extreme form of irony. If the teenager says, I just love it when my mom lectures me, she may well be using irony, okay? Because she says simply, she's not happy with her mom, you know, telling her what to do and what not to do, right? Okay. And then we have metaphor. Metaphor is a representation of one thing as if we're something else without a verbal signal such as like or as, okay? Now, this is very important to know the metaphor, what we mean by metaphor. Now, look at this metaphor, okay. Now, if I say, I am a lion, I am a lion. Now, this is a metaphor. Why? Because I refer to myself as a lion without using the word as or like. Now, compare metaphor with simile here, okay? Simile is the opposite of metaphor, or not the opposite, but it's the same as the metaphor. But the difference between metaphor and simile is that in simile, we use words such as like or as. So a representation of thing as if it were something else with an explicit verbal signal, such as like or as. To kill a mockingbird, Scott described a teacher who looked and smelled like a peppermint drop. So here it's a simile because we represent something by using the word like or as. So here is the sentence. I or Wa'il is like a lion, or Wa'il is like a lion. Now, is like a lion, this is a simile. Why? Because we use as or like. But if we say Wa'il is a lion, Wa'il is a lion, this is a metaphor. Why it's a metaphor? Because we don't use as or like. Okay. Now, I don't want to talk about metonymy and synecdoche because you know they need to be explained in a class, so I would skip them. Now let's go to the oxymoron. Oxymoron is a combination of contradictory or opposite ideas and qualities or entities, such as wise fool. So this is called oxymoron. Why? Because we have two words that are the opposite. Okay, wise is someone who's very knowledgeable. Fool is something that someone who's stupid, right? So this is called oxymoron because we have two opposite or contradictory ideas. For example, when I say, oh, this story is hot cold. When I say hot cold, uh, that is contradictory words, right? Hot and cold at the same time. That's called oxymoron. Now, personification, personification is taken from the word person, okay? And person here is a human being. When you personify, you give human characteristics to non-human things. So for example, sometimes called anthropomorphism, attributing giving human qualities to objects or animals. So when you find animals or objects speaking, this is called personification. Look at this example. In The Open Boat, Stephen Crane personifies the birds who sat comfortably in groups and looked at the men with unblinking scrutiny. He pushed personifications to comic extreme in The Shipwrecked Men's Thoughts. If this old 90 woman, fate cannot do better than this. She is an old hen. Okay, so here we have hen is like, you know, what hen is a chicken. Okay, so here we have a human quality given to animal who knows not her intention. Here hen is a metaphor for a silly woman who in turn personifies the idea of destiny or fate. So simply personification means giving human qualities or to objects and animals. Now, the last thing, which is symbol. Symbol is a person, a place, or object image that represents more than as its literal meaning. Okay. A symbol is more than a passing comparison, such as simile. Instead, as an allegory, its meaning usually relates to most details and themes of the work. Unlike allegory, a symbol usually associates more than two entities or ideas, may be obscure or ambiguous in its meaning. Okay, short stories or poems may refer to the central symbolic figure in the title, as in The Cathedral. Okay, so what the symbol is? Symbol is that when we have something or object that has many meanings. For example, the black color. The black color is a symbol, right? But it's a symbol for what? Symbol for death, symbol for fear, a symbol for confusion, a symbol for lack of security. So this symbol has more than one meaning, okay? Unlike allegory, allegory is a symbol, okay, or a symbolized story. But allegory, we have just two meanings, or like one meaning, and it refers to one meaning. For example, if you remember when we talked about the animal forms in the previous slide here, the animal farms, okay, the animal farm. Here we said that the animals are symbol of human beings, and they are symbol of the Bolshevik revolution in Russia. So that's one. It refers to one meaning in the allegory, but in symbol we have several meanings that comes up, or several meanings that come up. So that's all for the figures of speech. So today, let me just wrap up this class and say the following. First of all, we talked about the three types of narrators. We talked about the third person narration, the first person narration, and the second person narration. And we talked about the third person narration, and we said that we use the pronoun he or she or they. And this kind of narration is divided into three: omniscient, limited, and objective, okay? For the omniscient narrator, the narrator has access to the thoughts of characters and can comment on their feelings and emotions. In the limited narrator, he does not have access to all characters, but he has an access to a single character and comments on their thoughts and feelings. Now, the last one, which is the objective narrator, he does not have access to the character's thoughts, but he shows us characters through dialogue and through conversation and action. So simply we know the characters' feelings and emotions through their actions and through their dialogue. And the second one is the first person narrator. The first person narrator is when we use the pronoun I, okay? And most of the time, the narrator is a character in the story. In the third person, the narrator is not a character, but in the first person, the narrator is a character in the story. and he tried to be biased, and he has to tell the story from his or her point of a view. And that's why sometimes the first person narrator is unreliable narrator. Why? Because he tried to tell the story from his subjective point of view, from the use of pronoun I. The last one is the second person narrator, which is you, and the use of pronoun you, usually we find it in works that make the reader a character in the story. So when the reader is a character in the story, that's called a second person narrator. Okay, and then we discussed the difference between the implied author and the narrator, and we said that we should not confuse the narrator with the author. The narrator is the person who tells the story. The author is the person who writes the story. So the narrator may be a girl, but the author is an old man, right? So there's a difference between the narrator who tells the story and the author who writes the story. So most of the time, use the word narrator when you talk about the person who tells the story, not the author. Okay, and last thing that we discussed is the figures of speech, and we said that the figures of speech refer to the symbolic or the extra meaning beyond the literal meaning of the words, okay? And we discussed different figures of speech such as allegory, allusion, irony, metaphor, oxymoron, personification, simile, and symbols, and we explained them in details. That's all, guys, for today's lecture. Thank you very much for watching, and hopefully this is very explanatory and you will benefit from my explanation. Thank you very much, guys, for listening, and have a wonderful day.